Hello, my name is Paul Bayes, and this is a pre-recorded presentation for the 2021 meeting of the Society for Mathematical Psychology. Working memory refers to the ability to maintain information in an active state where it can be operated on by cognitive processes. The amount of information that can be held in this state at one time is very limited, and because working memory is an essential part of so many aspects of human cognition, perception, and decision making, these limits strongly constrain our performance in the world. A great deal of debate over recent years has focused on whether these limits on working memory are best described in terms of a limited number of discrete, indivisible quanta, like these children's blocks, or instead the limits are better expressed in terms of a limited continuous resource that can, like this plasticine, that can be divided up in any way you want, in a flexible manner. Today I'm going to tell you about a new interpretation of an established model of working memory and how I think it resolves this debate. This is an illustration of an analog recall task testing visual working memory. In this kind of task, a set of items is presented. Here, 3 different colour patches at different locations on an invisible circle. There's a brief delay, and then one of the locations is indicated by a cue, this thicker bar, thicker square here, and participants are required to click on the colour wheel to indicate the colour of the item, the colour they remember seeing at that location. So in this case, the correct target colour is located here, and the other non-target items presented in the same trial are here and here. We could present the information in this trial in a different way, as in this kind of two-dimensional space covering colour and radial location on that invisible circle. The 3 items are represented by 3 distinct points in this space. The cue corresponds to a particular location, and the response should be which identifies an item, which should then be the colour should be corresponding colour should be reported by the participant. Some years ago, we developed an account of working memory we call the neural resource model. It's based on the principles of population coding, inspired by single-cell recordings in visual areas of cortex. According to this model, the information in a stimulus array is encoded in the activity of a population of idealized neurons, where each neuron has a Gaussian tuning function centered on a preferred point in the stimulus space that will activate it most strongly. For example, this neuron has a preferred color and location that means that it will be activated quite strongly by the green item in this particular array. The activity of a large population of such neurons encodes the visual features of the stimulus array so that an estimate can be retrieved for the colour at a location indicated by the cue. This retrieval is imprecise because the activity of each neuron is corrupted by Poisson noise, a mechanism of divisive normalization, and means that the total activation reflecting all items in the array is held constant. The model has very few free parameters, one fixing the total population activity level, and one for each determining the tuning width for each of the stimulus dimensions, so 3 in total here. This model has proven remarkably powerful in its ability to capture many different aspects of working memory performance across different visual feature dimensions. The effects of the number of items in the sample array on error distributions is very precisely reproduced by the model. The model is a consequence of normalization, as the total signal available to encode all items is fixed. The frequencies of swap errors, that is, where an observer erroneously reproduces one of the non-target items from the display, are accurately predicted by variability in the cue feature dimension, including the effects of feature distance between non-target items and the target. Queuing effects can also, probabilistic cues can also be captured by increasing the signal for a queued item, which via normalization reduces the activity available for the unqueued items in the display. There are a number of other examples here as well. In almost every case, these additional predictions have come for free from the model without having to add any new parameters. In recent work, we've shown how a new perspective on this model reveals more clearly the critical elements that are needed to capture recall behavior. This change of perspective is achieved by associating each spike in the population of neurons with a particular set of stimulus parameters, matching the preferred stimulus of the neuron that generated the spike. In the idealized setting we've been considering, and in this illustration we're looking just at a one-dimensional slice through the population of neurons, in particular because the neuron's preferred features densely cover the feature space, this allows us to view each spike as a noisy sample of an item in memory, drawn from a distribution centered on the true feature values and with variability that matches the underlying tuning widths. We call the result the stochastic sampling model of working memory. In this illustration, each coloured square is a noisy sample of one of the stimuli, equivalent to a spike in the neural model. The key principles of the sampling model are, firstly, that the total expected or average number of samples is constant and can be flexibly allocated between items, just as in the neural resource model. Second, that the actual number of samples available at decoding is a Poisson random variable that varies from trial to trial, as illustrated by the frames of this animation. The samples themselves are independently normally distributed about the true feature values, and recall estimates are obtained simply by averaging samples. Crucially, although this description makes no reference to neurons or tuning functions, the models are exactly mathematically equivalent, or dual. This new perspective makes evident some connections to other models of working memory that were previously obscured. Sample-based models have a long history, originally as accounts of how attentional resources are divided and subsequently applied to short-term memory. Palmer explained declining discrimination performance with number of items in terms of a sample size model, where a fixed number of samples are evenly distributed between items. While the number of samples in the sample size model has typically been described as finite, in reality the consequences of this discreteness have been ignored on the implicit assumption that the number of samples is very large. However, if we consider taking the number of samples down to just 3 or 4, with that number still remaining fixed, what we end up with is precisely the Slopeless averaging model, to date the only fully specified model in the discrete class of working memory models. Having pinned down the differences between models to effectively a single factor, whether the total number of samples is a fixed or random variable, we set out to test the effect of this factor on fits to empirical data. We carried out model comparison based on a large corpus of single report tasks of the kind described earlier, and also to a single very large data set collected by Kirsten, Adam and colleagues on whole report tasks, in which all the array items must be reported one after another on each trial. Here are the results of the model comparison, plotted as log likelihood differences from the stochastic sampling model. First of all, we can see that for both types of task, there's overwhelming evidence that stochasticity in the number of samples improve fits to data. And in fact, the whole report data can't really be fit at all by the model with fixed sample counts, equivalent to Slopeless averaging. We also considered two minor variants on the models. In the Slopeless averaging model, the usual assumption has been that the samples, or slots in the original terminology, are distributed as evenly as possible between items. Making the distribution of samples random, while still keeping the total number fixed, improved fits to a degree, as seen here and here, but they still fell far short of the stochastic model. The equivalent change to the stochastic model is to distribute the stochastically varying total number of samples as evenly as possible between items. This actually provided very good fits to the single report data. However, it fit the whole report data very poorly at the difference in scale between these two plots. And overall, combining data, we found that the stochastic model provided the best description. To sum up, stochastic sampling provides a simple and intuitive account of working memory limits that also has a putative biological basis as an idealization of how neurons encode sensory features. There's a lot more in the paper I haven't had time to cover, including the relationship to the variable precision model of Vandenberg and Marr, which can be viewed as a sampling model taken to a continuum limit, and the finding that apparent item limits, like Miller's 7 or Cohen's 4, arise as an emergent property of the model, unrelated to the underlying number of samples. We've also released a MATLAB toolbox with a tutorial and code to fit the model. You can download it from our website. Thanks to my co-authors Sebastian Schneegens and Rob Taylor, and thank you for listening.